stood in my driveway on a Sunday afternoon in October holding a chocolate cake I had baked myself, and I watched my son close the front door before I even reached the porch steps. That was year 6. But I am getting ahead of myself. My name is Martin Okafor. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a landscaping and outdoor construction business in Boise, Idaho, started it with a used truck, a trailer, and 2 guys who believed I would actually pay them. By the time I sold it, we had 22 employees, 3 crews running simultaneously, and contracts with 3 of the largest commercial property management companies in the Treasure Valley. None of that happened because I got lucky. It happened because my wife Louise stood beside me through every lean winter, every payroll I was not sure I could make, every equipment breakdown at the worst possible moment. She kept the books the first 12 years. She answered the phones when we could not afford a receptionist. She believed in the business before I fully believed in it myself. Louise was the kind of woman people remembered. Not because she was loud or because she needed the room. She was just completely present wherever she was. At our son's school events, in conversation with neighbors, volunteering at the Boise Rescue Mission on Friday evenings. People trusted her immediately. I spent 34 years married to that woman, and I never once stopped feeling like I had gotten the better end of the deal. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in the spring of 2016. By that point, our older son Elliot was 30 and living in Denver working in commercial real estate. Our younger son, Theodore, was 27 and had recently moved to Portland with his girlfriend Vanessa, who he married the following year. They were grown. They had their lives. I understood that. What I did not understand, not yet, was how much of our family's center of gravity Louise had been carrying. The 14 months between her diagnosis and her passing were the hardest of my life. I scaled back the business and handed daily operations to my foreman, a man I trusted completely. I drove Louise to treatment in Boise and twice to specialists in Salt Lake City. I learned which days were bad days and which were worse. I learned what she could stomach and what she could not. I learned how to help her through the nights when the pain medication stopped working the way it was supposed to. And I learned how to do all of that without showing her how scared I was, because she had enough to carry without adding my fear to it. Both boys came when they could. Elliot flew in 4 times over those 14 months. Theodore came 3 times with Vanessa, who was pleasant enough but always seemed slightly inconvenienced by the circumstances, the way some people are when illness does not fit into their schedule. I did not judge them. They were young. They had jobs and mortgages and the ordinary pressures of being in their 30s. Louise and I had gotten through harder stretches with less support than they were offering. I was not keeping score. Louise passed on a Wednesday morning in July of 2017. She was 61 years old. I was sitting beside her. The funeral brought more than 200 people to the church. She had touched that many lives in this city without ever trying to be remarkable. Both boys were there with their families. Elliot's wife Janet organized the reception logistics with a kind of brisk efficiency I was grateful for, because I was not capable of organizing anything that week. At the end of the night, after the last guests had gone and the 4 of us sat together in my living room, Elliot looked at me and said, "Dad, we are going to show up for you. That is a promise." Theodore nodded. Vanessa held her husband's hand and said of course they would. I believed them. I had every reason to. The first month they were attentive. Elliot called every few days. Theodore texted regularly. Janet organized a meal delivery rotation among neighbors and church friends that ran for 6 weeks. It felt like family doing what family does when things are hard. I held on to that feeling. Then things shifted, gradually. The way daylight shortens in the fall where you do not notice each individual day, but one afternoon, you realize it is already getting dark at 5 o'clock, and you cannot say exactly when that started. Elliot's calls dropped to once a week, then every other week. Theodore's texts became shorter and less frequent. By the first Thanksgiving after Louise passed, I assumed I would spend it with at least one of the boys. We had always rotated holidays, but we had always been together for them. Always. I called Elliot in mid-October to find out the plan. He said he and Janet were doing Thanksgiving with her parents in Phoenix. They needed something low-key that year. He was sure I would understand. I called Theodore. He and Vanessa were going to her family in Eugene. "Sorry, Dad. Maybe Christmas." I made myself a plate that Thanksgiving. I sat at a table that used to seat 8 and ate alone and told myself it was just the first year. The grief was still fresh for all of us. Things would settle. They did not settle. Year 2, I offered to host Christmas. I told both boys I would cook everything, the prime rib Louise always made, her sweet potato casserole, the rolls she made from scratch every December since before Elliot was born. I said they did not need to bring anything except themselves. Elliot said they were going to Janet's parents again. It had become a tradition. Theodore said Vanessa's family did a big Christmas Eve thing and it would be hard to get away. He said maybe I should come to Portland sometime. I said I would love that. He said great. Let us figure out a time. We never figured out a time. Year 3. I stopped waiting to be included and started reaching out earlier. I called in September. I offered to drive to them. I offered to fly. I said we could do it. Any weekend in November or December, I was completely flexible. There was always a reason. Plans had been made. The timing was not great. Maybe after the new year. That same year, I started seeing photographs on Facebook. Birthday parties for my grandchildren that I had not been told about. Elliot's daughter Maisie turning 4. Theodore's son Owen turning 3. Family gatherings with both my boys, their wives, all the grandchildren, Janet's parents, Vanessa's sister, everyone together, smiling. My grandchildren growing up in photographs I was finding out about through a social media feed. Year 4, I had a fall. Nothing dramatic. I stepped off a curb wrong in a parking lot in February and fractured my ankle. I called Elliot from the urgent care clinic. He said that sounds rough, Dad. He said he would try to get out to Boise when things calmed down at work. He did not come. I spent 8 weeks on crutches managing a house and a business on my own. I ordered groceries for delivery. I slept on the couch because the stairs to my bedroom were not manageable. Not one of my sons came to check on their 60-year-old father with a broken ankle. Year 5, I found out my grandson Owen had started speech therapy. I did not find out from Theodore. I found out from a neighbor whose granddaughter attended the same clinic. I sent Theodore a text asking how it was going. He said fine, just a minor thing. The therapist was great. He did not offer any more than that. I did not push. I sent Owen a card with a $20 bill and wrote him a note about what a smart kid he was. Theodore texted thanks. That was the last I heard about it, until I saw a photo online months later of Owen at what looked like a celebration, holding a certificate, everyone beaming, my son and his wife and Vanessa's parents all around the table, and me nowhere in any of it. Year 5 was also when I started understanding the financial piece. Not the way I understood it later, but the first signals were there. Vanessa had called me the previous Christmas, which was unusual because she never called. She had asked how the business was doing. She had asked whether I had thought about retirement planning. She had asked with the careful tone of someone asking a question they have been thinking about for a while, whether Louise and I had kept our estate documents current. I said we had an attorney who handled all of that. She said that was smart. She just wanted to make sure I was taken care of. I told myself it was concern. A daughter-in-law being thoughtful. I moved on. Year 6 is when I drove to Portland with the birthday cake. Theodore turned 33 in October. I had called 2 weeks before to ask if I could drive up, maybe take him to dinner, spend a weekend. He said he was not sure what their plans were, that October was busy, but he would let me know. He did not let me know. The day before his birthday, I decided to go anyway. I baked his favorite, the chocolate layer cake with the cream cheese frosting Louise used to make, and I drove 7 hours from Boise to Portland. I had texted him that morning to say I was thinking of him. He had responded with a thumbs up emoji. When I pulled onto his street, both sides of the road were lined with cars. Through the front window, I could see people inside. Movement. What looked like balloons near the ceiling. I parked down the block and walked to the door and knocked, holding the cake carrier in both hands. Theodore opened the door and the expression on his face was not happiness. It was something closer to panic, smoothed over quickly into something neutral. Dad. What are you doing here? It is your birthday. I brought your cake. He glanced back into the house. This is just a small thing with some friends and Vanessa's family. It is not really a good time. He did not invite me in. He took the cake carrier from my hands. He said he would call me later. He closed the door. I walked back to my truck. I sat in it for a long time. I called no one. I drove to a hotel near the airport and spent the night there, and drove home the next morning. I had to pull over once on I-84 because I could not see the road well enough to drive. What Theodore and Elliot did not know during any of those years was what I was quietly doing for them when Elliot and Janet had a rough stretch financially 3 years after Louise passed. The kind of rough stretch that happens when two people buy a house in Denver at the wrong moment and then one of them has a health situation that drains the savings account. I arranged for their mortgage to be covered for 6 months. I did it through my attorney, set up in a way that looked like a relief program from their lender. I did not tell them it was me. When Theodore's speech therapy bills for Owen started running over what their insurance covered, I called the clinic directly and arranged for the balance to be handled through what the billing coordinator described to Theodore as a community assistance fund. It was not a community assistance fund. When Vanessa mentioned to Theodore that she wanted to start a private tutoring practice and needed equipment and some startup money, I arranged a small investment through an LLC my attorney set up, presented to her as a local small business grant. She applied for it. She received it. She posted on Instagram about how grateful she was for community support. They took all of it, every dollar. Not one of them asked where it had come from. Not one of them thought to wonder. Year 7 is when I understood what was actually happening. I was in my attorney's office for an unrelated matter when he mentioned, carefully, that he had received a call. Someone identifying themselves as a family member of mine had contacted his office asking about my estate planning documents. The call had not come from me. The person had not left a name. My attorney had given them nothing, but he thought I should know. I knew it was Vanessa. Elliot's wife Janet was direct enough that if she had questions, she would ask them directly. Vanessa was the one who thought in angles. She was the one who had called me that Christmas 5 years earlier asking about estate documents in that careful, concerned tone. She was the one Theodore deferred to in every practical matter. She was the one who had taken a grant from an LLC she did not know was mine and never once asked who was behind it. I did not confront anyone. I sat with the information for several weeks and I thought carefully. Then I called my attorney and I told him to start documenting every financial transaction I had made on my son's behalf, every dollar, every date, every arrangement. I wanted it all notarized and on file. I wanted it done in a way that was airtight. A month later, I was invited to Elliot's house in Denver for a Sunday dinner. One of maybe 4 times that year I had been invited anywhere by either of my sons. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I heard Elliot and Vanessa, who had driven over from Portland for the weekend, talking in the hallway. They did not know I could hear them. Vanessa was saying something about getting a clearer sense of what Dad is actually working with before anything gets complicated. She said the word assets twice. She said she thought they should have a general picture before the business situation changed. Elliot said something I could not fully make out. Vanessa said, "Let me handle it. I know how to ask the right questions." I finished my water. I walked back to the living room. I sat at the table with my sons and their wives and I had dinner and talked about nothing and watched my granddaughter Maisie draw on a paper napkin. And I did not say one word about what I had heard. But something had settled in me in that kitchen. This was not simply drifting apart. This was a plan. And it had been running for longer than I had understood. Year 7 also brought what I still consider the worst single moment of those years. Theodore's son Owen was turning 7 in the spring. Theodore had mentioned it in passing during a brief phone call, that they were having a small party, family only. I asked if I could come. He said he would check with Vanessa and let me know. He did not let me know. I sent Owen a gift card and a card with a letter inside telling him about when his father was 7, things he probably did not know, the kind of stories grandfathers are supposed to tell. Theodore texted me a week later. Owen says, "Thanks, Grandpa." That was the entirety of it. I did not sleep well the night I received that text. I lay in the dark in the house Louise and I had shared for 28 years, and I thought about what it meant that the only time my sons thought about me was when they needed something, or when they were trying to figure out what I was worth. I was not angry yet. I was tired in a way that went deeper than tired. Year 7 into year 8, I started having a conversation with myself that I should have started much earlier. It went like this. You have spent 7 years waiting for these men to show up the way you raised them, to show up. You have given them every excuse. You have given them money they do not know came from you. You have driven 7 hours and stood on a doorstep and driven 7 hours home. You have sat alone at Thanksgiving and Christmas and your wife's birthday and your own birthday. You have watched your grandchildren grow up through social media. You have heard your daughter-in-law discussing your assets in a hallway. At what point do you stop calling this a rough patch? The conversation took several months. I am not a man who moves fast. I have never been a man who moves fast. But once I have made a decision, I do not unmake it. In the spring of year 8, I called my attorney and I told him I was thinking about selling the business. He said he had a buyer in mind who had been asking about my company informally for 2 years, a regional landscaping group out of Salt Lake City that had been acquiring smaller operations throughout the Mountain West. We opened conversations in April. We closed in September. The final number was $1.8 million. Theodore had once made a comment offhand at a dinner years ago that landscaping was a tough business to scale, that the margins were hard. I thought about that comment when I signed the papers. Next came the commercial property. I had held a small storage facility on the east side of Boise for 14 years. Steady income, low maintenance, nothing complicated. That sold in December for $460,000. Then the investment accounts Louise and I had built over 3 decades, restructured and repositioned with careful guidance. Then the house. The house was on the market for 11 days. It sold to a young couple, a nurse and a teacher, who walked through it twice and made an offer the same day it hit the market. I signed at closing and handed the keys to people who I hoped would fill it with more life than it had held in the past 8 years. Before I left Boise, I put together a complete accounting with my attorney of every dollar I had directed toward my sons over the years. Every mortgage payment I had covered for Elliot, every medical bill I had arranged for Owen, every dollar that had gone into the grant Vanessa received. Each entry was dated, sourced, and notarized. If anyone ever wanted to argue that I had not been of sound mind or that I had been taken advantage of, that document was going to be a very brief conversation. I also set up education trust accounts for both grandchildren, Maisie and Owen. The money was structured to be accessible at age 25, with no parental access to the principal and no ability for anyone to petition the funds on the children's behalf. Each trust included a sealed letter from me. Not angry, just honest. My account of what happened, written plainly for the day they were old enough to want to understand. I packed what fit into my truck in a small trailer. 31 years of tools and equipment from the business I gave to my foreman with a letter explaining that they were his now. The furniture I donated to a Habitat for Humanity resale shop. Louise's things I had kept carefully in the back bedroom for 8 years. Her books, her winter coats, the quilt her mother made her, her wedding ring. Those came with me. Everything else I let go of without much ceremony. I changed my phone number on a Thursday morning. I did not leave a forwarding address with anyone except my attorney. I drove out of Boise on a Friday in March, and I did not look back. I drove to Flagstaff, Arizona. Louise and I had talked about it once on a long drive through the Southwest. How we liked the elevation, the ponderosa pines, the way the town felt unhurried. I had found a single-story house near the university on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. Big lot. A detached workshop in the back that was larger than I needed, which meant it was exactly right. I spent 2 weeks setting it up. On the 3rd Saturday after I arrived, I joined a hiking group that met at a trailhead near the base of the San Francisco Peaks at 7 in the morning. Mostly retired men and women. Nobody asked about my family. We walked for 3 hours and talked about the elevation and the birds and came back to the parking lot and said, "See you next week." I had not realized how much of my daily energy for 8 years had gone into the low-grade vigil of waiting for a call, waiting for an invitation, waiting for some occasion to matter enough to one of my sons that he would make an effort. In Flagstaff, that waiting was simply absent. I woke up and the day was mine. It took several weeks to stop reaching for my phone in the morning out of habit, waiting for something that was never there. 3 months after I left, my attorney called. Elliot had come to his office. Vanessa had called 4 times. Theodore had sent 2 emails to my old address that bounced back. They had found out about the business sale, the storage facility sale, the house. They were trying to locate the assets. My attorney passed along my new email address. I wanted to see what they actually had to say when they had a direct line to me. Elliot's email arrived first. He said I had frightened them by disappearing. He said what I had done was irrational. He said I needed to call him so they could understand what was going on. Theodore's email was more careful. He said he was worried about me. He said he knew things had been hard since Mom died, and he wished he had done better. He asked me to please just let him know I was okay. Vanessa did not email. Instead, my attorney received a letter from a firm in Portland suggesting that my recent financial decisions warranted a competency review, that there were concerns about whether I had been acting under undue influence, that a pattern of significant asset transfers in a short period of time raised questions about my decision-making capacity. My attorney's response was efficient. He sent the complete documentation. every sale at fair market value with independent appraisals, every contract reviewed by counsel, the full notarized accounting of the financial support I provided to my sons over 8 years, dated and sourced. A letter from my physician confirming I was in excellent health with no cognitive concerns of any kind. The assessment from the financial advisor who had overseen every transaction. The firm in Portland went quiet within 3 weeks. I wrote one email and sent it to both my sons at the same time. I told them I was well. I told them I was living better than I had in years. I told them that I had spent 8 years trying to remain present in their lives and had been turned away from a birthday party, left alone on every holiday since their mother died, excluded from my grandchildren growing up, and had heard my daughter-in-law discussing my estate in a hallway when she thought I could not hear. I told them that the trust accounts for Maisie and Owen were set and did not involve them. I told them the rest of my money was mine, built over 30 years of hard work, and I would use it or give it away as I saw fit. I told them that if either of them genuinely wanted their father back in his life, not out of obligation, not out of calculation, I was open to that, but I would need to see consistency, not convenience. Then I closed the laptop and went out to the workshop and started sanding a walnut tabletop I had been working on for a week. Elliot responded that I was being cruel. Theodore said I was punishing Maisie and Owen for something that was not their fault. Nobody said I had been right. Nobody said they were sorry. It has been 14 months now since I drove out of Boise. I wake up early, make coffee, and sit in the workshop doorway or out on the back step depending on the weather. A man named Curtis, who lives 2 blocks over, started coming by on Saturday mornings about 6 weeks after I arrived. He is a retired civil engineer, 68 years old, came to Flagstaff 20 years ago and never left. We drive up to the Peaks trailhead and hike for 2 or 3 hours and talk about nothing in particular, the way men do when they are comfortable with each other. And I have come to value those mornings more than I could have anticipated. I donated a portion of the money to a scholarship fund at the community college in Boise, in Louise's name, designated for students in nursing programs. She had always said that if she had her career to do over, she would have been a nurse. It felt right to put the money where she would have put it. 2 months ago, I received an email from Elliot. It was not like his previous emails. He had been talking to a therapist, he said, which surprised me because Elliot has always resisted anything that resembled introspection. He said he had spent a long time blaming me for leaving without warning, and that his therapist had helped him look at what had come before the leaving. He said he was not going to make excuses for himself because there were not any that held up. He said he was sorry. He asked if I would be willing to talk on the phone, just once, no agenda, no pressure. I have read that email perhaps 20 times. Part of me is cautious in the way that 8 years of being disappointed teaches you to be cautious. Part of me recognizes the boy who used to sit beside me in the truck on job sites on Saturday mornings when he was 9 and 10, asking questions about everything he saw, wanting to understand how things were built. I have not responded yet. I may. That decision belongs entirely to me. I am 63 years old. I built a business over 30 years from nothing. I loved my wife through everything life put in front of us, and I sat beside her until the very end. I raised 2 sons who forgot I existed until the moment they realized I had made decisions they could not reach. I buried the woman who mattered most to me. And then I did the thing that none of them ever thought I was capable of. I walked away first. On my terms. With my name intact and my future unclaimed by anyone else's calculations. There is one thing I want you to take from this. Waiting is not the same as having nowhere to go. Patience is not the same as permission. And the man who built something from nothing once can build something from nothing again. Anywhere, at any age, on any morning he decides to begin. I spent 8 years being somebody's background. I am spending the time I have left being my own story. I keep coming back to the cake. The chocolate layer cake with the cream cheese frosting that I drove 7 hours to deliver to a son who did not invite me inside. I think about that drive home, pulling over on I-84 because I could not see clearly enough to keep the truck on the road. And I think about the fact that when I got back to Boise, I did not call anyone. I did not tell a single person what had happened. I just went inside and sat in the kitchen that Louise and I had shared for 28 years, and I thought about what kind of man lets that happen to himself twice, let alone 8 times. The answer, I have come to understand, is not a weak man. It is a man who was raised to believe that loyalty is unconditional and that family is worth whatever it costs. Those are not bad values. But values without discernment are just habits, and I had turned patience into a habit so ingrained that I had stopped asking whether it was still serving any honest purpose. What I know now in a way I could not have articulated when I was standing on Theodore's porch is that character shows itself most clearly not in what people say, but in what they do when they think no one is watching the ledger. My sons knew I would not stop calling. They knew I would not stop calling. They knew I would show up. They knew I would keep the door open. And somewhere in that knowledge, they stopped feeling the weight of what they were choosing. Accountability only exists when there are actual consequences. I had removed all of mine, one excused holiday at a time, the decision to sell the business, to move the assets, to leave without a forwarding address. None of that was anger. I want to be clear about that, because anger fades and makes bad decisions. What I felt was something closer to clarity, the kind of clarity that only comes after you have finally stopped arguing with the evidence in front of you. I had spent 8 years hoping that the next phone call would be different. Reason, when I finally allowed it to operate without interference from hope, told me it would not be. There is a version of this story where I stayed, where I kept the house and the phone number and the open invitation, and I spent the rest of my available years being a background detail in other people's lives. I would have been comfortable. I would have been safe. I would have had nothing left that was genuinely mine. What I built in Flagstaff in 14 months is smaller in square footage and larger in every way that matters. I wake up with purpose. I chose, not purpose assigned to me by someone else's calendar. Curtis shows up on Saturday mornings and we walk in the pines and talk about very little, and it is enough. I put Louise's name on a scholarship that will help someone study nursing for decades after I am gone. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, the thing. I am not a man who talks much about regret. But I will say this clearly. The regret I carry is not about leaving. It is about the years I stayed past the point that staying was honest. Every man has the right to know his own worth. The ones who figure it out early live differently than the ones who need 8 years in a closed door and a drive home in the dark to understand it. I needed all of that. I got there eventually. That is enough.